morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Welcome to this SAFETY4SEA Talk. In this talk, we'll be discussing about the mental health and the importance of mental health in shipping in these days, especially in these days of the COVID era. Mental health it is important for every day in life. It affects in many ways the way we think, feel, and act. And long before the pandemic, shipping has realized the importance of mental health, but now we feel it's more important than ever. We've seen several aspects of mental health being discussed in the headlines, issues like anxiety, stress, fatigue, depression, and so on and so forth. We have the COVID. We would like to discuss today why mental health is now more important than ever. Now, in order to do that, we have assembled a panel of experts. Let me briefly introduce them to you. We have Dr. Pennie Blackburn. Dr. Pennie is with ISWAN. She is a consultant clinical psychologist. We have Johan Smith. Johan is the wellness program manager for the Sailor Society. And last but not least, we have Captain Harish Subramanyam. Captain Harish is the regional head of business relations for the Shipowner Club based in Singapore. So without any other further ado, I would like to ask our panelists to briefly introduce themselves, asking Dr. Pennie to give it a start. Dr. Pennie.
Hi, thank you very much for inviting me to the panel this morning. So my name's Dr. Pennie Blackburn. I'm a consultant clinical psychologist. I grew up in a seafaring family. My father was a master mariner, and so I've got an interest in working with seafarers. I first got involved with the shipping industry a few years ago when I was invited to talk at the ITF Seafarers conference about the way that we approach mental health in the humanitarian sector where I'd been working. And since then, I've been lucky enough to get involved with working with ISWAN and developing some self-help tools, trainings, and most recently policy guidance called Mentally Healthy Ships. So yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Pennie. Johan?
Hi, good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to be part of this panel this morning or this afternoon, depending on where you are. I've been involved in the industry for the last 14 plus minus years. I was first a chaplain working in the Port of Cape Town, and after that I started developing what is today known as the Wellness at Sea program, looking holistically at seafarers and providing multi-level interventions and really trying to encompass everything that is relevant to a seafarer's life at sea, their social wellness, emotional wellness, intellectual, spiritual, and physical wellness, and how all of these things work together. So I've been working with seafarers for a long time, and I am very much looking forward to our discussion today.
Okay, thank you, Johan. Captain Hari, briefly introduce yourself.
Yes, good morning, good evening, good afternoon. Thankfully not good night as yet for any of us. But I'm Captain Harish Subramanyam, and I'm an ex-seafarer, and I've got about 15 years of sea in the mainstream shipping, as well as then I diversified and went offshore. I have now been with the Shipowners P&I Club for the last 11 years, out of which the last 10 years were part of the loss prevention team, where we were developing initiatives and a lot of training. And so based on all this training, the club has embarked on a new scheme for which they put me in charge. This is the Medi-Sea scheme, which is the medical enhancement scheme for seafarers. And this offers comprehensive enhanced medical examinations right now for Indonesian and Filipino seafarers on entered vessels. But we try to do it at no added cost. So we're going to expand this slowly to other nationalities, a measured approach. The club pays for all the additional medical tests. And we want to make sure that everyone goes on board is completely fit in all respects, with a strenuous environment on board, because we believe good physical health is one of the primary stepping stones to good mental health. We cannot imagine anyone attaining mental peace when there's some underlying medical problem. So we are starting with the basics, and I have the honor of actually heading this scheme and rolling it out. And we hope that we can make a difference. And I hope that we can also share some ideas in today's panel. Thank you for having me here today. And I'm extremely honored with these illustrious speakers, Dr. Pennie and Johan, to rub shoulders with you all over here. Thank you for having me, Apo.
Thank you all very much. Now, I would like to say, in order to make an introduction to my first question, I've been in shipping for not almost, 28 years. So this is my 4th decade in shipping. I started in the early 90s as a superintendent, as a safety consultant, a lot of training, etc. So I've been around hundreds of ships during my experience so far. So I can assure you that shipping now is not the same as shipping in the 90s and shipping in the early, beginning of the century and so on and so forth. So I would like to ask you to briefly give us your, let's say, outline of where we stand as an industry with regards to mental health, and why now, in your opinion, mental health is a key factor, let's say, that make or break for the seafarers. Dr. Pennie.
It's an interesting question, Apo. Thank you. I mean, I think you're absolutely right. And actually, recently, just in the last few days, I was doing a training with a group of seafarers, and we were talking about how life at sea has really changed. When my father was at sea, when he first went to sea, age 16, long time ago now, there were long periods in port where there was quite significant shore leave. There was an opportunity to see the world. There was a lot of advantages of life at sea, as well as the pressures of a life at sea. And a lot of this has changed, hasn't it, over time? So that crews are getting smaller. The crews you have a much more multicultural and diverse crew. Shore leave is much shorter, and often the periods in shore are very in port are very pressured. People are very busy. So there's and these days we have certainly over the last few months and last year with the pandemic, there's been an absolute sort of focus on the pressures of life at sea and how voyage extensions have really contributed to the stress that people are under. So for all kinds of reasons, a lot of the changes that are happening anyway pre-pandemic, but also with the pandemic on top of that, we can see that seafarers, are vulnerable to the mental health, and they have far fewer opportunities for doing the things we can all do to look after ourselves. So they need to be mindful about how to care for themselves.
Okay, Johan, your thoughts?
I think to really understand where we are today, we need to go a bit back in history and understand what it was before. I think shipping comes from a very sort of macho outlook. We are rough and tough, and nothing relating to mental health can ever happen to us to where we are today. If I just go back 10 years and sort of reflect on the journey of wellness at sea. 10 years ago, I vividly remember talking at a conference in London, and there was severe opposition, to say the very least, to the whole idea that companies are responsible for things like well-being and mental health. And I remember one commentator stating that it is Nancy Pansy stuff seafarers don't care about. And that's only 10 years ago. But then there was the early adopters who sort of saw the value in all of this. And it slowly awareness to where we are today. And I think the early majority, the pragmatists, have now adopted the whole thing that mental health is important. So I would say we are in a good place. The pandemic has pushed us to a tipping point where we can no longer sort of say, but it is not an issue. So the early adopters, they have now done it. So I think in time to come, it is unpreventable that the rest will follow suit. And for that reason, I think, although a lot needs to be done, we have come a tremendously long way.
Okay, thank you. Captain Hari?
Yes, I think I echo the thoughts of the first two speakers as well. And I think we first have to, we're in a good place. I want to start with the positives first. We've made good progress, especially we've got such good organizations such as my co-speakers over here who are doing such a fantastic job. But I think it's important that we have to identify what the stigma is regarding mental health, you know. Is it really the seafarer is not mentally capable? I mean, we keep using the term, and have we allowed the shipping ecosystem to change so much and drastically that all of a sudden now the seafarer is the victim of change and suddenly he's not suitable for this environment? Because that's the way it comes across to the seafarers, you know. I speak to some seafarers. I mean, I fully understand the intention, why it's necessary. But when it's being said, sometimes if the seafarer misconstrues, and if I was in their shoes, I would be thinking, mental, hold on a minute, what's wrong with me? You know, and one or two seafarers have quipped to me, you know, I'm not crazy, you know, I'm fine, but it's a very tough life kind of thing. You stopped sailing a long time ago, so don't you preach to me. So I get that a bit. It would be good to see, we have to ask ourselves what has changed in the last 30 odd years that has drastically altered the shipping ecosystem. And that's where we would find the problem first and then an appropriate solution. But I should say this because we've got a lot of fantastic plans which we would be discussing later, of course, by the Sailor Society and by ISWAN. But however, there are a lot of companies who choose to adopt these measures of their own without doing proper research. And maybe that is not perceived the right way as a seafarer. It's not one size fits all. And so then that turns out to be a more stressful experience on the seafarer. So I would think we are in a good place. We are making slow and steady progress, but a lot more has to be done so that we pitch it at the right note where nobody feels offended, especially our seafarers.
Okay, now I would like to, I hate it, but I have to play devil's advocate here. What we are talking about is not mandatory. So Johan, I think at some point I understand why he said that. He said it's the responsibility of the ship managers, let's say, to put it up. Is it, so whose responsibility is it? If I'm a small ship manager, let's say operating 5, 10, 15 ships, I'm a small ship manager. Now, and again, I would like to remind you that if you see the global composition of the ship managers, of the population of the ship managers, it's only 50, 70 ship managers in excess, I think, of 100 ships, and maybe more, less than 200 and something like that in excess of 50 ships. And we have approximately 4,000 ship managers with less than 50 ships. So the majority of these operators, managers, you name them, so they don't operate a lot of ships. So whose responsibility is it? Is it the managers? Is it my own responsibility? Is it the industry's responsibility? Again, I would like to comment on ISWAN and Sailor Society. They are the leaders in terms of bringing these programs to the market, and we are supportive of that as SAFETY4SEA. But again, I would like to discuss and hear from you, whose responsibility is it? Because it's not a regulation, and someone, a ship owner with 2 or 3 ships would say, it's not a regulation, I don't have to comply with that. So what is your message to these guys, to the small ship owners and the small ship managers, and whose responsibility is it? Dr. Pennie. For some reason you are muted.
Sorry, yes, no, it's a great question, Apo. Now, I've done a lot of thinking about this, and it is a shared responsibility. So it's a shared responsibility between the company, the organization, the crew managers, and the individual. Now, the organization, the company, does have a duty of care towards seafarers, towards all its employees. In exactly the same way that it has a duty of care in physical health, it also has a duty of care in mental health. And when we were writing Mentally Healthy Ships, which is policy guidance for shipping companies to look at how can you put mental health promotion into practice on board vessels, we went to the MLC and we said to them, you know, how confident can we be in saying this, and saying that the responsibility also does lie with companies? And they came back to us and they actually were much stronger on this than I had felt comfortable with being myself. And they actually rewrote our section in Mentally Healthy Ships and said everything that is in these regulations applies to mental health in the same way that it does as physical health, which was really interesting. So I think, although it's not explicitly written, thinking about all those regulations that apply to health and safety and how they apply to mental health is important. But of course, we all have a shared responsibility to look after ourselves. So likewise, I have a responsibility to take care of my well-being, but also I can only do that if the company cares for me as well. So it's about a shared responsibility and having the conditions on board vessels to ensure that people can look after their well-being, and any risks are identified and modified, mitigated as far as is reasonably possible. So yeah.
Johan, what do you think? Other than regulation, what do you think?
I can only confirm that what Dr. Pennie said, that it should be a shared responsibility, starting with the individual. So in my mind, first of all, you are responsible for yourself before anyone else is responsible for you. So, and that is one of the things that we like to emphasize, that sticking with the maritime environment, you are the master of your own vessel. And second to that, there's the companies, of course, but I want to take it further and say on a regulatory basis, we also need some input there. And I know that there's quite a bit of pushback the moment you sort of say more regulation, but we, in my mind, need a stronger framework in terms of regulation, so that it's absolutely clear what is expected. And in my experience, there's a lot of brilliant companies out there, and they don't need more regulations. But unfortunately, for some of the not so good companies, there's some sort of framework needed to say this is sort of what needs to be in place. And what we also need to understand is that not everyone in the shipping industry is experts on mental health. Companies are not experts in mental health. And we need some sort of framework to have a reliable source to go to understand how the industry as a whole can address mental health.
Okay, Captain Hari, I would like to make a comment on the regulation, but I'll do it after Captain Hari. Captain Hari, your thoughts?
Sure. Yes, I do agree. It is a shared responsibility. It's something like people having their medication with them, but you can't force them to take their tablets on board. The master can't be everybody's doctor or nanny to make them swallow the pills. So it is everybody's responsibility. I think the seafarers, once they understand the value of their life, they make such silly decisions sometimes on board, daredevilry as such, wearing that badge on the shoulder. It won't happen to me. And unfortunately, that's when they undervalue their life. I think once they realize the importance of how they're breadwinners for the family, how they put food on the table for that entire family of theirs, I think they would be more responsible. That brings a little bit of fear before they do something rash. Um, yes, so that's what makes the seafarers tick. As per the companies, unfortunately, it's a lot which is regulated. If it's a regulation, people have to follow it. There's a lot when it's voluntary, it goes on the back burner. There are some half-baked attempts to just tick the box. Like I said, one size doesn't fit all. Are you doing something on mental wellness? Oh yeah, not a problem. We've had somebody give a talk on board, and that box is ticked that I'm doing the initiative. But it should be quality initiative. So there should be standards. There should be regulatory standards, at least a framework, not to the T. But I think there should be more encouragement of involvement by organizations such as ISWAN, Sailor Society, etc. People who are doing the research and the hard work and actually following the right way. It's important that this right message reaches everybody, so it's well received, perceived. The benefits are noticed by the seafarers themselves, and by word of mouth, it spreads that this is the right thing. It's all in the better interest of the entire industry.
Okay, I'd like to make just a comment on this, because I did ask that. I mean, I'm one of those who believe that we don't have a tsunami of regulations in shipping. And again, I'm saying we do not have. People tend to, it's a nice discussion, it's a buzzword, it's a myth, because we have to compare shipping with other safety intensive industries, such as, the offshore, the aviation, the oil and gas, the petrochemical, the nuclear, and so on and so forth. Talking about safety intensive industries, some sort of regulatory oversight needs to be in place for a number of reasons. But other than that, I asked, and maybe that a small ship owner might say it's not a regulation. Why? Because he would like to, to bend the rule, to put it in that sense. But again, it's not only a matter of regulation, it's a matter of how you keep up with your crew and how you, in the long run, harness this relationship with your own crew. So I do understand, and there is an ongoing debate in shipping about best practices and self-regulation and regulatory oversight by IMO, or in some instances we've seen from other bodies outside the IMO, like the EU, the USA, China, and so on and so forth. And people are not very happy when someone else is imposing regulation on them. Why? Because we cannot self-regulate our own industry, in a sense. It's an ongoing debate, and there's no black and white. There's a lot of gray in this debate. And I would like to ask now, my next question is, I understand where we stand, etc. We've seen I'm just giving an example here, the fatigue, stress. Stress is a key issue, fatigue, even suicidal thoughts. So we have suicides in the industry. It's a small fraction, but it's a fraction. We have cases like that. So I understand that we have made progress compared to where we were, let's say, 10 or 20 years ago. Where can we improve? Where do you see room for improvement? And maybe some more wins, to put in that sense. Dr. Pennie. You are muted again for some reason.
Sorry. Where do we see room for improvement in what sense, Apo? Sorry?
In terms of mental wellness, I mean, we've seen in the past, understand that we have made a lot of progress. But stress is an issue, fatigue is an issue, anxiety is an issue, depression is an issue, suicide is an issue. I mean, there are a lot of cases, we have issues. Maybe it's better than what it was, let's say, 10 or 20 years ago. So I'm asking you, where do you see room for improvement, and in what way? So that's what I'd like to hear from you.
I see, yes. I think, as you say, there has been a lot of development. So awareness has increased over the last few years, and I echo what Johan was saying earlier on, that there is more willingness, more appetite for understanding. People are more encouraged to, more motivated to think about mental health and what needs to happen. I think every company ought to have some kind of mental health at work plan or policy. with some objectives around how they would like the mental health of their seafarers to be. What are their objectives? What are their vision? I think that should include then looking at what are the risks in that their particular context to mental well-being of the crew. So it's very different working in a cruise ship than it is working on a tanker or on a super yacht. So it's particular kind of what are the particular risks to well-being in that context, and then trying to see, can those be mitigated? Can they be modified? If they can't be modified, what do we need to put into place to enable people to have positive mental health? There can be some work around mental health promotion, and I'm sure that Johan will talk about the app and support around kind of understanding what you can do as an individual, but also the conditions on board, and having mechanisms for support when people are struggling, and trying to address the fear of asking for help. Because if people are afraid to ask for help because they think they'll lose their jobs, or they won't get a promotion, or they won't get another contract, they won't ask for help. And that's when problems exacerbate, and where you can even end up with suicide. So addressing the stigma is huge.
Okay, Johan, your thoughts? Where can we have some early wins?
If I can just for a moment jump back to a comment you made earlier about the small ship owners. I think why we are at a tipping point is because there is all of a sudden a big awareness that it's not just about regulation, it's actually about the bottom line. If you look after your seafarers, it will influence your bottom line and the profitability of your company. And I think that's an important place to be. And as that realization sort of sinks in, I think we will see smaller ship owners joining in, and from that understanding that it will really influence their bottom line. In terms of what we should do, if I can try to make it really practical, I think first of all, training. We just did some research. Again, apologies for referring to wellness at sea all the time, but that's my background. But sort of gauging what wellness at sea, what the outcomes are over a long period of time. The research found that people who underwent the training, and specifically mental health training, 10% fewer of the seafarers who actually did wellness at sea said that they felt anxious on board. Almost 14% said they less said that they felt sad on board. And I think what training does is it really goes a long way to break stigmas. What is very interesting from this research is how, for example, 9% of the group agreed, who did the training, agreed with the statement, I would be embarrassed if a person in my family become mentally ill, versus 50% of the people who didn't do the training. So I can quote quite a few of these figures showing that it is actively breaking stereotypes. Maybe in the next round, I'll elaborate on this just in terms of taking the training beyond the classroom, because that is, for me, is key. It can't be just training. It should go well beyond it, but I'll comment on that maybe in a moment.
That's what I would like to ask as a next question. Captain Hari, what do you think?
Yes, of course. I think the biggest problem we have faced with is mindset of the ship operators. No, they don't like to move out of their comfort zone, because they always wonder, what are they going to unearth once they embark on this route? Is the seafarer going to machine gun them down? That are they going to be seen as bad people creating poor work environments or slave drivers? So I have this problem now when we are rolling out our Medici program in the region. It's the mindset, and they fail to grasp on the larger picture. But I think it's because it's a new operating zone, and which is why they are a little worried on what can of worms this may open for them. Of course, there is also a cost factor for it, because nowadays we know shipping isn't as profitable as it used to be at once upon a time, and everything is down to costs. No doubt, everybody has a training budget, but it depends on how well it's used. I'm sure if everybody on the ship owner's side is educated that it's a win-win situation for all, more of them would subscribe to the views of it. I also go to another thing about stress, Apo. I mean, we were talking about stress. And then one more thing, actually, I would say is our seafarers are very stressed. I mean, they have to entertain calls and queries 24/7. They receive WhatsApps, emails throughout, and they need to answer yesterday. There is nothing like working hours and switching off your mind. They've got a lot of connectivity on board. I could be short for this, but there are two sides to every coin. Too much connectivity, because once they finish off with the office work, they are faced with a lot of inundation of home-based problems which they are not there to sort out. For us, ignorance was bliss. When we used to sail, we never had internet on board. Ignorance is bliss. When we used to receive our letters at the next port, oh Lord, somebody passed away 2 weeks ago. Well, okay, it's 2 weeks ago. We used to feel bad. Unfortunately, now the seafarer is presented with that information real time, live streaming of events at home, which can be quite tasking. It can take a lot on your mind, especially when you're supposed to be switching off. But I know for now in this industry, it is a norm. You can't attract seafarers if you do not have good Wi-Fi on board.
I cannot agree more. I mean, I am personally stressed because I have to monitor, emails. No, we work at the office. I mean, we have to monitor Teams. Someone says, I've sent you. Where exactly did you send it to me? You send it to the email, you send it to Teams, you send it to Viber. Where exactly? No, I send it to LinkedIn. I mean, it's a source of stress. I mean, even for ourselves. I cannot agree more with what you say, because they are over there and they have to respond 24/7. When life is calling them, they cannot say they are absent. So I cannot agree more with what you said, with the connectivity and the two faces of the same coin. I cannot agree more. Now, I would like to ask you, because Johan started, what's, let's say, the next steps beyond the awareness, beyond the training? Captain Hari touched upon some of the issues. Dr. Pennie, your thoughts?
And I agree with Johan that the training is really important. And at ISWAN, we've been doing a lot of training with senior officers and shoreside staff who have responsibility towards the well-being of crew, and being able to recognize the signs of people that are struggling and knowing how to respond. So we've been, as part of that, we're doing a lot of stuff around stigma, around mental health, and why we can't talk about it, and what stops people asking for help, and trying to break some of that down. And I think actually that is very effective. One of the approaches that we use is a psychological first aid approach to educate senior officers or well-being champions in kind of first response. What do you do if you're worried about somebody, and where can you link them up for further support? So I do think the training's really important, but I think it's only one part of a wider policy that actually you do also have to have effective support mechanisms in place, and you do also have to pay attention to what are the stressors on board? What are the stressors that seafarers are facing? Is it fatigue? There are issues around kind of, as you say, communications, all the bureaucracy, all the, extensions to contracts, etc., job insecurity, all these kinds of things. Trying to look at how can we reduce those and promote positive well-being, promote social interaction on board, for example, promote good team cohesion, have positive leadership that supports everybody. All these kinds of things are, there's so many different sort of aspects to well-being.
Johan, beyond training?
So in my mind, we need to address three things. First of all, pre-crisis, then during crisis, and then after crisis. And for all three of those things, there should be certain solutions in place. Pre-crisis deals with the proactiveness of looking after mental health. First step, as we said, will be training. For example, beyond the training, we've got what we call peer support groups. It's groups of 20 seafarers coming together, and we rely on their own knowledge to help one another, because I am not the expert of anyone else's life. I am not the expert of seafarers' lives. They are the experts of their own lives, and they've got a lot to give in terms of their knowledge, in terms of the different cultures they come from. So in each of these groups, we have a moderator who flags up things. It's digital groups, and the idea is to build trust and build relationships. And that for me is key. Also part of this proactive part is an initiative where we, for example, call vessels. As opposed to waiting for them to call us, we call vessels and say, hi, how are you doing? And we ask the captain to connect with all of the cadets, or with the engine crew, or with whoever, just to get that relationship going. So we should have solutions in place pre-crisis. During crisis, we've got the helpline. ISWAN has got a brilliant helpline. Sailor Society has got helplines. So that is in place. And then post-crisis, we should also focus on that. After a crisis, do we have solutions in place to effectively address and assist seafarers? And just one comment is, I think to a large extent, the NGO sector within the maritime industry was very ready when COVID came along, because we were ready from a post-crisis point of view, that we were ready to react and respond to things happening. So I think that's a big positive. But I would focus on those three areas very specifically and ask, how can I address each of those?
Yeah. Captain Hari, your thoughts?
From a club's point of view, we don't like to reinvent the wheel. In fact, we prefer working with the experts. I mean, there's no point of everyone kind of doing the same things in parallel. It'll be good if we tie up. So due to which I'd like to share that our club's loss prevention team is currently working on their latest initiative of Sail Home Safe. And this is aimed to provide operators with resources and tools. They rethink existing systems, taking into consideration the human element on board to create a happy, safe, and vibrant experience on board entered vessels. So we're working right now. I think one of the experts includes Dr. Claire Picken of Safe Marine, who featured in one of the previous talks. So she's also working closely with the club. We've done enormous work actually with ISWAN as well. There were a lot of publications and all which came out, and it was a fantastic project we had over a couple of years. Now the thing beyond, I mean, I had this webinar actually last week. I was moderating for the company of Master Mariners, and the topic was AI and how we can use it more. And one of the persons I was speaking to was a tech developer from London, an ex-seafarer, and we went down the route of discussing about wearable technology, people wearing these portable devices like we have our Fitbits and our Garmins. And this monitors their, it also does sleep and fatigue. I mean, the club did something on the back of Project Martha about a few years ago. That was a fantastic report. It opened our eyes to fatigue, resource management, etc. measuring fatigue. But this is something where we can clearly use, actually, if they wear it all the time, it would be a good monitor to find out where they are getting anxious, where they are getting stressed, and probably then we could revisit and see what are the triggers, that would be real time and all the time. And I think these software developers can make something that is quite a good program with the necessary algorithms. And then probably that would be a good learning phase for the artificial intelligence to show us where we can focus on in case we've missed any areas.
Yeah, Johan, yes.
If I can just make one comment, and I said it before in a previous webinar, is that we tend, and I'm guilty of that as well, we tend to dream up grandiose schemes to address mental health, but we don't get the basics right. And perhaps Dr. Pennie can confirm or tell me if I'm correct in this, but the basics, eating, sleeping, exercising, those are the basics. And we should get that right before we try all sorts of funny business and try to sort of dream up all of these schemes. We should get the basics right. And for me, those basics, those three things are some of the main pillars of mental health. And we haven't got that right over the last few years. Sorry, just a side comment.
Fully agree. I would like to add to what Captain Harish said. The most, let's say, highly respected gadget in this world globally is a ring. And the ring, there's one provider, I feel it's only one provider so far who are providing the best ring. And you wear the ring and you get some analytics with a web app. And what they monitor is the heart rate variability. So that's the latest biomarker of where we stand, and so on and so forth. This is what I would like to add to what Captain Harish said. And then I would like to, because I said I cannot agree more with what you said, but we have to go back to the basics. That was where I would like to end. So I would like to thank you for your comment, because at the end of the day, we are thinking these, high-tech apps and the rings and the bands and everything, and we forget that we're talking about the basics here. And in some ships, they don't have good quality of food, let's say. They cannot sleep. They cannot have good quality of sleep, and so on and so forth. And that's a shame. So I would like to ask, my next question would be about best practices and lessons to be learned, maybe from the past or from other industries. I would like to hear from you your thoughts on if there's anything to be learned, maybe we have to bear in mind. I would like to thank you both for your comment, because it may go to a high end, like high tech, but we have to go back to the basics. Dr. Pennie, your thoughts, best practices, lessons to be learned.
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to pick up on what you were saying about going back to basics. I think in addition to those sleeping, eating, rest things, there's also what you mentioned earlier on, Johan, about positive relationships on board, and I think these are absolutely key. The culture on board, in terms of the cohesion, social interaction, positive working relationships on board the vessel are absolutely key, because you're living and working in the same place for an extended period of time. If there's tensions amongst crew, if there's bullying and harassment, if there's things like that, it really is going to affect everybody's well-being. So that's absolutely core, and that's not complicated, is it? It's not high-level technical, it is about, those essential things that contribute to our well-being. I think in terms of good practice, I mean, there's more and more kind of things happening around. One thing recently, I've been doing some trainings with TK shipping, and we had a really lovely training where we had senior officers and shoreside staff training together, so that they were talking with each other about kind of how they can support each other around mental well-being and what is needed on board the vessel. So that really close connection, and I think that was really fantastic. Other companies like V Ships are appointing mental well-being champions, so that there's designated people to perform this. And also ISWAN at the moment is doing a big project on the social interaction, encouragement of social interaction on board vessels. And so that is something as well that's really important. So I think there's lots of things, but they don't need to be expensive and they don't need to be high tech and complicated. I think you're absolutely right. It is about the essentials, the basics, and you know, getting those right first.
Johan, your thoughts on best practices and lessons to be learned?
I think if I can borrow something from Intertanko, they recognized three different things. The first one was about recognition, and I think best practice should deal with recognition. In other words, practices that communicate value, understanding and empathy for the work that seafarers do on a day-to-day basis. So in a best practice guide, there should be suggestions in terms of how do we recognize the work that seafarers done. The second thing that they said was about stimulation, practices that facilitate social contact and introduce a variety into seafarers' lives on board. And I think the things that I previously mentioned, for example, calling vessels, having the peer support groups, that's all about stimulation. And then the last thing is about certainty. Over the many years in the industry, I think I have 1,000 times heard the story of seafarers being uncertain. And uncertainty, I think, is one of the biggest things that hit us as a global population during the pandemic. And uncertainty eventually translates into anxiety. So certainty for me, in terms of contracts, for example, those things are key. And I think that will play a big role if we can take those three things into consideration.
Okay. Captain Hari, your thoughts on best practices and lessons to be learned?
From other industries, one thing I would like to, sorry, I'm championing the cause of seafarers. It's just me being the mariner I am. I think respect for the seafarers is something that's predominantly missing, especially from the external world, because everyone thinks they own the vessel and the crew, and there is lack of respect. We spoke earlier about how everybody decides to send a message and the master must respond immediately. If he decides to prioritize other things overriding authority, he's deemed unprofessional nowadays, because they have so many avenues of bombarding him right from the personal mobile phone, etc. So there's another thing which I think which would stop is this blame culture we have, because we all know that a lot of things that the seafarer gets affected is they are worried about what will happen to them, because everything, the buck stops on board. Regarding other industries, I keep revisiting an incident where a BA flight landed in Edinburgh instead of Dusseldorf a few years ago. And this happened because of a chain of errors and started with someone on the ground staff filing the wrong flight plan. But there was no error apportioned on the pilot. So, but can you imagine in our industry, if the captain docked a ship at the wrong berth, let alone going to the wrong port, he would never be afforded any benefit of doubt. He would just be dragged through the mud all the way and branded as, absolutely. I mean, he would have been devastated, and everyone would have been reminding him for the next few lifetimes to come. So that respect should be given. Everyone should know that there are human beings on board when they're dealing from external sources. And they should also respect the privacy, that they've got other things to do and not just standing on the edge of the plank to jump how high when anybody asks them to. I think that should be something which would allow them to then kind of not feel so stressed about the work environment they are in. And absolutely, I mean, going with what they've said about interpersonal relationships on board with multinationals, etc., I think I cannot agree more with that. Definitely, I support that completely.
Okay, Dr. Pennie?
Yeah, I just wanted to pick up on the uncertainty issue and also what Captain Harry was saying. And I think this is one of the lessons from the pandemic, is that whilst that crew change crisis was at its peak, a lot of seafarers that were calling the ISWAN helpline, for example, were asking questions about what was going on. And what became very clear was that people were not getting information. They didn't know what was happening. And a lot of seafarers felt ignored and abandoned, and as if their company just didn't care and nobody cared about them. They weren't important. But actually, on the other side, from a lot of the trainings I was doing, I was hearing companies shoreside working really, really hard to try and sort this problem out, but they weren't communicating that. And so I think there's something about open and transparent communication as far as possible, even when there aren't clear answers, trying to reduce uncertainty as much as possible, absolutely. But sometimes even telling people, you know, we've got this big problem, we're really trying to solve it, we'll keep you informed as to what's going on. I mean, I think even that can help and build trust. And the ITF Seafarers Trust Yale University research on mental health showed that the number one thing that made a difference to the people, seafarers on board who were suffering anxiety and depression, was how much the company cared. And so this is a lesson to learn, I think, being able to demonstrate that the company does care and that seafarers, like you say, Captain Harry, they're respected, they're considered important, they're valued, we appreciate the tough job that they are doing, you know.
Okay, now we have to, let's say, wrap up. I would like to ask you, what, as we are getting out of the dark, moving into the light at some point with the pandemic and the impacts of the pandemic. So I would like to ask you, what lessons have we learned out of the pandemic with respect to mental wellness? What do we keep? What do we improve as we move forward? Captain Harry mentioned some stuff. Johan, yes. Dr. Pennie, also. I would like to wrap up your thoughts. What are we keeping? What are we improving? What's the idea? Dr. Pennie, as we move forward.
I think for me, one of the really interesting things that has come out of the pandemic has been that people who live and work on shore have appreciated what it's like to live and work in the same place. When everybody has had to work from home, they've started to really understand actually what that's like, what it's like to be separated from your friends and your family, your loved ones, people you care about, if there's a sickness around, if, you know, not being able to go and help. And how important actually internet connection actually is. And I appreciate what you're saying, Captain Harry, about the real-time phenomenon, but actually I think also how important we've all discovered that being connected is. Now, these are things that seafarers have always had to deal with, but I think it's giving a better understanding, a more direct understanding for people who work shoreside in what it's really like on board. And I think those understandings are really useful. And I think the increase in mental health problem, the increase in suicides we've had very tragically over the pandemic has at least put the conversation about mental health firmly in the center, and appreciating that actually we really do need to pay attention to this and be and put stuff into practice for the future. So those are the key things for me, I think.
Okay, Johan.
For me, one of the most amazing things I think we again sort of found in the pandemic is that we are stronger together. And for me, that is key on so many levels. Talking from an NGO perspective, I think there's room to be stronger together as opposed to being individualistic. From a company seafarer perspective, stronger together. And maybe a second thing, that we are all connected. And I know it sounds like a very abstract thing, but I think COVID made that really clear, that we are all reliable on one another. And if one part of the ecosystem where we operate in, if one part is not doing well, the rest will not do well either. And I think those lessons for me, although it may sound abstract, is something that I would like to keep on sort of reminding myself of going forward, because I think there's a lot of value in those things that are often forgotten. And I think the whole thing about mental health, maybe there's this debate to what extent did COVID sort of highlight mental health versus it brought along a whole new sort of mental health issue. And I think it's always been around, but COVID just highlighted it. And I think we must keep on shining the light. And it is an issue that is as old as the industry itself, but COVID in some way managed to put it in the spotlight, and we should work hard to keep it there.
Okay, thank you. Captain Hari?
I think Dr. Pennie nailed it. I mean, that the people ashore now have felt what it's like to be on board. Live the seafarers. I love the ring of that. I mean, it never occurred to me until you just said it, you know, that they are facing what the seafarer faces day in, day out. And they were feeling stressed about it. So why doesn't our seafarer have the right to feel the same? Is he not human enough?
Exactly.
Brilliant. I mean, I think that really needs to be reverberated, that I love it, you know, and yes, I mean, mental health was always that thing where the old timers used to say ships of wood and men of steel. And now you've got ships of steel and men of wood. I've heard that from my dad as well, who was an old time sailor. But that's how it used to be perceived. And mental illness was seen as the seafarer being weak and fragile. But our bunch have shown what a resilient lot they are. I mean, look at this pandemic. They kept the world alive. They made sure commodities reached everywhere. We are proud of our seafarers and industries. They have shown the world how resilient we are. You know, aviation, everything was grounded, no pun intended. But, you know, our guys have made it possible. And at what cost? You know, they've stayed on board for immeasurable months, well past the 11 months. Yes, of course, people just say that, oh, you know, they're complaining. But look at what they've achieved in this. They've kept us alive. They've kept all of us alive, you know. And we must share that moment where we celebrate them. In fact, every presentation I give now where seafarers are concerned, the first thing I do is I thank them, you know, for their sacrifice in these few months. And absolutely. So like I said earlier, it was something that just kept like a pendulum. Mental health kept swinging in, swinging out of the picture. Suddenly, you know, sulfur regulations take more predominance than that. Some other new double hull regulation and some oil pollution files. And suddenly when there's nothing, mental health swings back inside. But now what has happened is the clock has stopped with our pendulum right there. The focus has now put firmly on the seafarers' problems. And why not? When they walked the tightrope for us, I think it's about time we do our best to repay them.
Decarbonized, I can say decarbonized or not, autonomous or not, you name it, people are going to be at the center of this industry. So even if we're talking about autonomy, we're not talking about unmanned ships. So people, we will be needing people, and people is in the head of the industry. So we will be discussing these issues, not the same issues, but similar issues around people in the future as well. So I would like to just give you 30 seconds each. I would like to ask you, let's say, the last idea to give away. If you could change one thing that would have either a profound or an immediate impact to improve mental health across the industry. One thing, within 30 seconds, a couple of sentences maybe. One thing, what would you change and why? So give me your last thoughts to wrap up the panel. Dr. Pennie.
It's a tough question. I think one key thing would be around the stigma against mental health. I think reassuring, I think us all understanding that we all have mental health and there are times that we might struggle, and that's being human. I think that's key to everybody understanding that actually there may be times people struggle and they need a bit of extra support from peers or even professional support or helplines, and that's okay. It doesn't mean that they're weak and they can't do their job. So companies, I think, need to really reassure people that they won't be detrimentally affected if they speak out or ask for help. So it's around the stigma for me, okay. I think.
Johan?
If I had a fairy wand, the one thing I will change is I would shorten contracts. I think there's ample evidence that the longer period the seafarer is on board, the more likely it is that he or she will suffer from some sort of mental problem. So that's my wish.
A friend of mine said something to further extend to what you said, not necessarily shorter periods of servicing on board, but long-term contracts. Let's say make a contract with a company like for 5 years. And they state in this contract, you have to stay on board for so many months and on ashore at so many months, periods not exceeding, let's say, 3 or 4 months. The same way they do it in the oil and gas. The offshore industry is working. I'm not saying they have 5-year contracts, but they're working with contracts. And within these contracts, yeah, secure contracts. So something like that. Yeah. But it's a nice idea what you say. Because the other idea of my friend is going to be a little bit more, provocative. Captain Harry, your thoughts?
Oh, you're talking of provocative. Wait till you hear me. I had 2 ideas. First one, Johan spoke my thoughts on shorter contracts. Sorry, my dogs sometimes like to participate in this thing. But the other idea, like I think, Apo, I've been like a broken record. I've said this earlier. Have more people on board. We've reduced the number of people, loneliness, and of course you have more people on board, more hands. The workload is shared, the burden is shared. There is a few more people with 12 people on board. It's difficult to have a social life because everybody's on some watch or resting for some. We used to have 30 to 40. Okay, maybe we can't push it that much, but at least we could have a few more people to share the burden, the load, the happiness, and the sorrows. I think it would go some way towards making it a little more vibrant on board.
Okay, so I would like to thank you all. I would like to thank you all for bringing your ideas to the table. I would like to thank all our viewers, and I would like to let's say see you soon, live if possible. Otherwise, see you online in one of our events. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. See you. Bye bye. Have a good day.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.